Welcome to another episode of That Can't Be Right, a podcast about exploring structural wrongs, cultural oddities, and wild opinions. I'm your host, Ryan Rogan, and this episode is all about sports. I'm a retired high school athlete that once had dreams of playing in the WNBA. Dreams change, and I'm unemployed, doing a podcast from my closet. Just what my parents and coaches wanted me to do with my Hyatt. Anyway, the WNBA kicked off its 25th season recently, and the reply guys on social media are active. Lots of middle school second stringers and Draymond Green talking about how women's leagues don't make money, how women can't complain, and how the game isn't as good or exciting. But y'all, my hometown team, the Houston Rockets, won 17 games this season. That is not good. That is not exciting. That is very bad. But you bet your bottom dollar they were still charging $70 for the last home game of the season. So I'm talking to David Berri, a professor of economics at Southern Utah University who has spent the last 25 years researching sports and economics. His work covers a wide variety of topics, including the evaluation of players and coaches, competitive balance, drafting players, labor disputes, and gender issues. I'm really excited to talk to him about the economics of women's sports and why comparing the WNBA to the NBA, National Women's Soccer League to Major League Soccer, National Fast Pitch to the minor leagues isn't quite right. But first, make sure you subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening to this podcast, so this podcast will be with you wherever you go. Then if you like this podcast and you're listening on a fruit device, leave a review. And while you're listening to this podcast and scrolling mindlessly through Twitter or Instagram, follow TCBR Pod, where I ask important questions such as, why isn't resealable bacon the norm in bacon packaging? Or what costs more, renting a Lamborghini for a day or your monthly housing payment? That's it for now. Let's talk to David. Best place to start is at the top. Very basic. How do professional sports leagues, specifically men's leagues, to start, make money? I spend money on jerseys, going to games when it's not a pandemic. How are these teams making money?
The main way they make money now is broadcasting revenue. So it used to be gate revenue. It used to be, if you go back, 50, 60 years, it was almost entirely the gate. The gate was what drove it. So a somewhat amusing story from NBA history is when the NBA merged with the ABA in '76, the St. Louis franchise, they didn't bring it in. They didn't bring in the Kentucky franchise. They didn't bring in the St. Louis franchise from the ABA. And the St. Louis franchise said, we're not taking your buyout. You're going to have to make a better deal with us. And the deal they asked for was something like 2% of all broadcasting revenue for the teams that got admitted from the ABA. And the way they wrote the contract was forever. 2% forever. And when they made the deal, there wasn't any broadcasting revenue. So the NBA is like, okay, if that's what you want, then that's fine. Well, then as time went by, obviously that revenue went up dramatically. And so they ended up paying the St. Louis owners when they finally in the last few years negotiated a buyout on that deal. They said, we can't keep giving you 2%. And so the deal they ended up making is they ended up spending something like $800 million. No, $800 million on the St. Louis, on that St. Louis franchise. So I tell that story because when sports leagues talk about how much money they think they're losing on women's sports, nobody's ever lost $800 million on women's sports. The NBA did lose $800 million on the St. Louis Spirit, a team that never played in the NBA. And they were okay with that. So I think that story highlights how big the broadcasting revenue got. It was so the NFL, without any fans last year, or just 1 million fans, they had some fans in some stadiums, they lost about $4 billion in revenue, but the league makes $16 billion in revenue, so it's about 25% of the revenue. So most of the revenue is broadcasting deals, and they make a tremendous amount of money off of that. And that's why, one of the reasons why the NFL can, put a franchise in Green Bay, which is not a major sports town. It's a little town. It's a little town in Wisconsin. You could put franchise anywhere and they'd make money because it's broadcasting.
That is not a take I expected. You can put a franchise anywhere and they would make money because of the broadcast, right?
Yeah.
So when people talk about expanding, and we can talk about this later too, but when people talk about expanding, specifically the WNBA, they always say, oh, what about Austin or what about San Francisco? Like those are friendly, like communities that would be friendly to the league. And it's like, well, I mean, you do it. Maybe the same logic doesn't necessarily apply to WNBA, but like you could put a team anywhere because everybody's going to want to watch on.
Well, WNBA is different because their broadcasting deal is not as good. The NBA negotiated the WNBA deal, and they negotiated a bad deal. And so the WNBA gets $25 million a year in broadcasting revenue.
And how much does NBA get? Just
I don't know. The NFL just signed a $100 billion deal over 10, 12 years. The NBA deal, the new deal that they're expected to sign when the next one expires is in the 70 billion range. But I think the comparable for the WNBA is Major League Soccer. Major League Soccer's deal is about $100 million a year. And the WNBA gets higher television ratings. So this is a recurring theme in women's sports, is that men constantly undervalue women's sports. They undervalue the television deals. The highest rated soccer game in U.S. broadcasting history is U.S. women's soccer in the World Cup. The broadcasting deal for that was not particularly good. And they asked the executives, and they're like, well, we didn't think the ratings were going to be that great.
And they didn't think the jerseys were going to sell that much.
And that's the other thing. Jerseys constantly sell out for women. They don't produce enough. They do this constantly. And they always do this. It's a recurring thing because the men are making the decisions and the men are not fans of women's sports. So for men, women's sports is a business. It is no different to them emotionally than if they ran a cardboard factory. It's a business. So they look at everything in terms of here's our revenues, here's our costs, these are our profits, this is what we think is going on, as if they're running a cardboard factory. When it comes to men's sports, it doesn't make a damn bit of difference to them whether it makes money or not. Steve Ballmer bought the LA Clippers for $2 billion, and nobody thought that franchise was worth $1 billion. He paid twice as much as what anyone thought it was worth. Why? Well, there's only 30 NBA franchises, and he wanted one.
Yeah.
And so they said, it's for sale. It's worth about $800 million. And people are saying, oh, I'll bid $1 billion. He says, $2 billion. I'll bid $2 billion. And people are like, $2 billion for the Clippers? The Clippers are the worst team in sports franchise history. Why would you spend $2 billion on it? I don't care. It's one of 30, and I want it. $2 billion. I have $100 billion. I don't care. Now, think about the WNBA. Now, if Steve Ballmer was terrifically excited about owning a sports franchise, he could have bought every WNBA team, every team in the National Women's Soccer League, every team in the National Pro Fast Pitch League, every team in the hockey. He could have bought every women's professional team in the history of the world. He could have bought all of them for $2 billion, and he could have owned every single one of them. He didn't want that. He wanted a men's sports franchise. That's what he wanted. Because this is, I think, the big difference between men and women's sports from the men's perspective. Men fantasize about men's sports a lot.
Yeah.
When Steve Ballmer is sitting there watching the Clippers play, he is imagining that he is a Clipper.
He's sweating just as hard.
Yes. Yeah. Mark Cuban is living through his team.
Yeah.
The men who own women's teams aren't even in the stadium. They're not even there. They don't care. It's just a business. And they send out the occasional tweet saying, hey, our team won. Yay. But it reads almost like, again, it's like you run a cardboard factory and you had a good sales quarter. We had a great sales quarter. It's like that's how it reads. It's like you're not emotionally involved in this in the slightest. This is just a business you own. Because what I want to see in women's sports is the owners on the sideline getting excited. And they're not doing that. 3
things. 1, my goal in life, and we'll talk about this later, is to bring the Houston Comets WNBA franchise back to Houston. My goal, or my personality, as owner would be a Mark Cuban asshole type because that draws attention. And if that's what it takes, I'll do it. 3, do you think that Steve Ballmer essentially overpaying for the Clippers by $1 billion accelerated like the increasing value of professional sport teams in the last few years?
Well, the values have been going up. They don't seem like they're in line with what we know of revenues and costs. And so I don't know that it accelerated it, but it certainly is part of a trend that people do this. They overspend on it because they're not buying this as a business. They're buying it. It's an emotional investment. It also gives them things that you can't get otherwise. So one of the things that you can do as a sports owner is you have access to politicians you wouldn't have otherwise. You have access to celebrities you wouldn't have otherwise. I tell my students a story of, imagine Steve Ballmer, when he bought him, they had Chris Paul. So imagine Steve Ballmer called up Chris Paul before he became an owner and asked Chris Paul, you want to hang out? Chris Paul would be like, dude, you're a middle-aged white guy. I don't want to hang out with you. Because but then Steve Ballmer becomes the owner. It's like, when Jerry Buss owned the Lakers, he would go to parties with Irvin Johnson. That's what they would do. And it's like, Irvin Johnson's not going to hang out with Jerry Buss if he's not the owner of the Lakers. That would be ridiculous.
Yeah. It's not a match made in heaven.
That's what they're buying. They're buying, and for them, it's this fantasy. They're living this fantasy life. And they don't have that same kind of emotional attachment when it comes to women's sports. They don't live through this. This is something that is, to me, very interesting about sort of the sports experience, is that people live their lives through these things. And to them, it's personal. When your team doesn't win, you get upset. You're unhappy, which doesn't make any sense because you didn't lose anything. You're not there. You didn't play. It has nothing to, and the other thing about it is the players who did play often don't care as much as you care. That's something that I don't think a lot of fans get about sports. There was somebody told me a story once. They went to they were watching the Red Sox play the Yankees or something like that in Boston. And the Red Sox lose and they're all unhappy and they go out to a bar and there's Red Sox players with Yankees players just hanging out together. Yeah. Like, how can you hang out together? They just beat you. It's one game. We don't care. Yeah. We'll play tomorrow. It doesn't make any difference. We don't care about any of this. None of this matters to. There's a great story that Kareem Abdul-Jabbar told about, or maybe Irvin Johnson told the story. Irvin Johnson's very first NBA game. He comes out of college. He's 19 years old. Very first game with the Lakers. They win on a last-second shot. And Irvin Johnson's in the locker room jumping down and screaming like they won a title. And Kareem walks over to him, sits him down and says, we're doing this 81 more times. You cannot get that excited about any of these. Just put on your clothes and shut up. It doesn't matter. They could have won. We could have won. Nobody cares. This is a job. It's just a job, and this is not college. We don't care anymore about those kind of things. Get excited if we win a championship. That's fine. But a game? You're going to get excited for a game? Come on, that's insane. It doesn't make any difference. There's 82 of these. How can you get that excited about? And that's the thing about, all these. But it's a men's sports story. That's what men do. When it comes to women's sports, I want the owners to have that same feeling Irvin Johnson has and Mark Cuban has. And they don't seem to have it. They're not there. They're not excited. So if your dream is to do that, that's great. I can tell you a little bit about what it cost. A WNBA franchise costs something around $10-20 million to buy. Okay, I can do that. A national pro fast pitch team, the commissioner told me, cost $250,000 and $1 million a year to operate. So you can have one of those a lot quicker. Okay. And so there's, and they play they play more games than WNBA, and so there you go. So you could do that too. So, I don't know what a National Women's Soccer League team costs, but, I know a couple years ago it sold for $4 million was one. I don't know what the LA team cost. I have to look that up, but it's not as much as the WNBA.
So questions based on that. What are you mentioned like comparing the WNBA to Major League Soccer. For the fast pitch league, is a comp more like a minor league farm system team in terms of?
No. Okay, so this is something. So this is something also about men's sports. Major League Soccer is minor league soccer. It's not Major League Soccer. That's not correctly named. Everyone who follows soccer, which is called football in the rest of the world, understands that the major football leagues are in England, France, Spain, Italy, Germany, Brazil. Those are the major ones. Major League Soccer in the United States is minor league soccer. If these players were good, they'd be elsewhere. They're not that good. That's why they're not elsewhere. And this is what we know about minor league sports. Minor league baseball has 160, or it had 160 teams before they contracted them, but it had 160 teams. And the last year they had attendance, they had 160 teams. They've been around for over a century, and the leading team in terms of attendance is less than 10,000. That's the leading. Of all the 160, it's less than 10,000. Minor league sports don't draw an audience, and they don't have any growth because the fans know these aren't the best. I know they're not the best. If they were the best, they wouldn't be here. So National Pro Fast Pitch is the best. It is the best softball league in the world. WNBA is the best women's basketball league in the world. National Women's Soccer League is the best women's soccer, although the Europeans are getting closer. And so those are the best. Those are the top. What's odd about Major League Soccer is that men are throwing $300 million into buying one of these franchises. And since they're never going to be the best, what are you buying? You're buying a minor league team that's going nowhere. It is going nowhere. There's no way in the world this is ever going to go anywhere. I can show any European league and I'm going to get bigger attendance. Even in the U.S., I'm going to get bigger viewership because I know those are the best players. And when I show a Major League Soccer team, I'm like, well, these aren't the best players. These are just some players. They were great. They wouldn't be here. Why am I watching this? And you know that if any player in Major League Soccer suddenly becomes amazing, they're going to leave. Why would they keep playing Major League Soccer? They can go play in Europe. And so that's something I think that's also important about understanding the nature of the way men are making investments is that men are throwing hundreds of $millions of dollars at men's sports, even if there's no future. And you look at women's sports, you're like, well, clearly you got to understand this is the best women's sports league, and there's a future for this. There's a fan base. You know, it's the audiences, television audience are growing. The attendance of the WNBA is pretty comparable to the NBA attendance at the same time. I think you can imagine pretty easily, given that other women's sports events such as World Cup draws huge audiences, that in 20, 30, 40, 50 years, WNBA teams are going to look a lot like NBA teams today. So if you're going to buy one now. I mean, this is not to buy one. But the thing is that, I mean, the Indiana Pacers sold for about $4 million in 1984, and that franchise worth $1.5 billion. I mean, that's a hell of an investment.
That's better than Dogecoin or whatever.
Yeah.
I think.
So you're looking at that going, so if you could go back in time and buy, the Indiana Pacers 40 years ago, you would have done it. I mean, that would have been a hell of a deal, and it's like, so we've already seen this happen. We've already seen the story happen. So the thing is that when I think the guy's name is Herb Simon, when he bought the Pacers in '84, he didn't know it was going to happen. It hadn't happened yet. He wasn't sure. The NBA had been around at that point for about 30 years, and it was still struggling. And so at that point, he's like, I'm not sure this is going to work out. It's been here for 30 years, and you still don't seem to know what the hell you're doing. And then suddenly it takes off because that's what sports leagues do. It's a generational thing. You learn your fandom from your parents, and it takes generations to build that up. This is something that people say about like the WNBA. They'll say, if you come to one game, you'll be hooked. I'm sorry, that's not how anything ever works. No. Sports franchises, you gotta watch lots of games to you're asking someone to develop an emotional attachment to something that's imaginary. There is no such thing as the Minnesota Lynx. It doesn't exist. It's just in our heads. I want you to care about this thing that I made up. I want you to, when the Lynx lose, you got to feel bad. I don't know what the Lynx are. Yeah, that's what I need you to do. It's the same thing when the Celtics and Lakers were playing in the 50s and the NBA was drawing 3,000, 4,000 fans a game. Why were they drawing 4,000 fans? Why did nobody want to go? Because everyone, these are college basketball stars. You already saw these people in college. You were excited about them in college. Yeah, I was. But now they're in the NBA, and I don't know what that is, and I don't know what a Celtic is, and I don't know what a Laker is, and I don't care. So how am I supposed to get excited about that? The Celtics won. Is that good? What is a Celtic? Who's making up the names of these teams? This is insane. What is a Celtic? And Laker is a made-up word, right? That's a made-up. There's no such thing as a Laker. And then you got another team called Knickerbockers. What the hell is that? Why can't you name teams like Tigers and Lions and Bears? Those are animals. We know what the hell they are. Everyone else does that. What are you doing? Why did you make up a basketball team with teams that are totally just made-up words? And that's where the NBA started.
Yeah.
And now when the Celtics and Lakers are now, the NBA is terribly concerned because maybe they won't be in the playoffs. Maybe they won't make it. And that's going to be, and there's these huge fan bases. Well, I'm sorry, 50, 60 years ago, there's no huge fan base. Nobody knows what these things are.
Yeah.
And so these things take time. But if you were given that we've already seen it happen, you got to think, you put down $10, $20 million into the NBA franchise, that thing's going to be worth a lot of money in 30, 40 years. So now it's time to buy. And so, but you got people throwing $300 million at a Major League Soccer team. It's like, that's never going anywhere. In what universe is it conceivable that American soccer is ever going to be comparable to European soccer? For that to happen, the Europeans have to come here, and they're not going to do that. You would literally have to have like $100 billion to make that happen, and you don't have that kind of money. So you're never going to get there. And so where are you going with this? And yet these multi-billionaires are like, I just desperately want to own a sports team, and I can't get one of the four majors, so I'm going to buy the next one in line, and that's Major League Soccer. It's like, but it's not the next one in line. The women's sports leagues are all in line. If you have $300 million, buy 15 of those. Yes. But they won't do it. It's like, okay, you're not making investments based on profit and loss. You're making it based on that you have these emotional attachments to men. It's called sexism. That's your issue. Boom. That's the whole issue. This is all sexism. And the way to think about it is men very much fantasize in sports about other men. That's what they do. And they desperately want to be those men, and they're living their lives through these men. And you're like, when I put it that way, doesn't that make you feel a little weird?
I think you hit the nail on the head. If we were not committed to a full exploration of this topic, we could end the conversation right there, because that's all it is. It's sexism. It's men not being able to, like you said, treating it like cardboard boxes instead of like appreciating the stories, appreciating like the players' backgrounds, and like developing that emotional attachment. That you've, like I said, hit the nail on the head.
You got to get to a point where you're so emotionally involved. So I'm a big fan of the Minnesota Lynx. So I have trouble watching the Minnesota Lynx. So I do what I always do when I'm emotionally attached to a sports team. When they're on, I put them on, and then I leave the room, and my wife is like, why are we watching this? I can't watch it. They're going to lose. And she's like, and then I check in, like I walk in like every 15 minutes. How's it going? She goes, will you cut this out? What are you doing? I'm like, I can't watch. I feel like I'm sitting here, they're going to blow it. This is going to go bad. And that's how sports fans are. You have that feeling like somehow you're controlling the action. By me watching this, a bad thing's going to happen. And that's insane. That's an insane attitude. But that's what an emotional attachment leads you to do. And the thing is that you get the sense that people who actually own the franchises, they're like, I don't know, it's cardboard boxes. Tell me how the concession sales were tonight. That's kind of what I'm interested in.
There you go. There was a year or a season a couple of years ago where the Sparks and the Lynx both got off to like hot starts, like double digit, high teens wins to open the season. I lived in LA at the time. I did not go to an LA Sparks game until that streak was over. I was not going to go to the game and be, in my mind, the reason they lost. I don't play.
Exactly.
I don't call plays.
That's bizarre.
Nothing.
And that's what a sports fan does. It does that. You do that. You are emotionally attached and you feel like you're living through this. And this is what's missing in women's sports is these male investors aren't doing that. You know, they should be Steve Ballmer sweating through his shirt while he's watching the Clippers play. And they're not doing that. They're not at the game. So, and that's a big thing holding it back because it deals with, you know, the whole issue of why is the WNBA structured the way it is? Because they treat it all as if it's a business and they're trying to cut their costs. So they limit their roster to 12 roster spots. They're terrified of expansion. Because what if the expansion team doesn't make money? And you're like, the whole league is so small. What difference does it make if it makes money or not? The whole league only generates maybe $70 million in revenue. How big could the losses, if there are any, and I really don't think there are losses, by the way. I doubt that story. But even if there were losses, what are we talking? You said there were $10 million in losses? The Rockets blew more than $10 million on Carmelo Anthony. And they got nothing out of the guy. And I was like, and they didn't care. They're like, who the hell cares? I don't care. I'm going to throw money at these people. You know, you got people sitting on NBA benches who are doing nothing. You have guys who are out of the league who are doing nothing. And the NBA wastes money on them, and they don't care in the slightest. But you tell the NBA, we're half owners of the WNBA. We say we lost $10 million. And that's New York Times story. They lost $10 million. Really? That's a story? How is that a story? They lost $10 million on a guy who's not in the league anymore. Why don't you tell that story in the New York Times? Well, yeah. That's just a men's sports story. This is a women's sports story. And there's this underlying story that they're putting in all of these narratives about women's sports. See, women's sports aren't popular. Nobody likes them. That's why they lose money. It's men's sports that are they're the right. And there's this whole thing you get, and this goes back throughout history, that sports are a male domain and women are not invited. And so when women do anything, men zero in on the negative story.
Absolutely. I'm just going to jump in real quick because we've talked about Steve Ballmer. We've talked about Mark Cuban. We mentioned I can't remember his name, but you said his name, the guy who bought the Indiana Pacers for $4 million 40 years ago. You know all their names. The only names off the top of my head that I can think about, owners' names in the WNBA, I know Magic Johnson owns the Sparks because I was in LA and I saw him at the games. Not that he talks about it a ton. I know Renee Montgomery is currently a part owner of the Atlanta Dream because that's a recent transaction. But before that, the person who was dominating the news as a WNBA owner was former Senator Kelly Loeffler. Like, the owners either aren't putting themselves out there, I don't want to put it all on them, or the reporters aren't talking about the owners if they're at the games. But I think a big problem you're saying is that, like, they're not showing up at the game sweating through their shirt, cheering for the teams.
James Dolan owned the Liberty for years. He gave stories where he told the media, "I lose money on the Liberty." Dude, you lose money on the Knicks. You don't know what the hell you're doing. I mean, you lost lots of money on the Knicks. And so he took the Liberty out of Madison Square Garden and put him out in the suburbs. And you're like, why are you doing
Community
that?
Rec Center.
Yeah. And he's like, well, it's really expensive, the rent in Madison Square Garden. And people are like, you own Madison Square. What do you mean? What's the rent? You negotiated with yourself. What are you charging yourself? And you're saying it's a huge cost because I'm charging myself a lot of money. You're charging yourself. You're the one making the money. You could cut the rent anytime you want to.
Yeah. Or I mean, even if you don't want to play at Madison Square Garden, how many universities are in New York that have
exactly
better, like, maybe not NBA stadiums, but still better than Westchester or wherever they were, community theater looking place.
And you're like, why would an owner do that? If an owner was impassioned about his team and he wants his team to succeed, he doesn't do something like that. He's doing that because he doesn't care. And that's why he's doing it. And that's the whole issue. They don't care enough. And that's what's missing. Because when it comes to, this is something about men's sports. Why do they have salary caps and payroll caps? Why do those things exist? Because what would happen is, from their perspective, is if we don't have those caps, these owners are so insane about their teams, they're going to spend $500 million on their roster so they can win a championship. And you're like, well, and as an economist, I would say, well, of course they wouldn't do that. That would be irrational. Who would spend so much money just to win a championship? And the answer is, well, they would, because they don't care about the money. They don't give a damn about the money. They just want to win. And if you tell them, you spend $500 million, you can assemble a roster of LeBron James, Anthony Davis, and every other player that you want, you'll have a dream team, and you'll win every single game. Yeah, I want to do that. You won't make any money doing that. You're going to lose $200 million doing that. I don't care. I don't care in the slightest. I just want to win. That's all I care about. And you're like, okay, well then why would it go to the WNBA? You're like, I think on my WNBA team last year, I think I lost $1 million. You lost $1 million? You have $25 billion. What do you care if you lost $1 million or not? You're like, okay, that's because there's no emotional attachment here. That's why you're telling that story.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's another story about early NBA history. When the NBA was really teeny tiny, much smaller than WNBA. The NBA back in the 50s the whole league was worth about $15 million. It was 1/5 the size of the WNBA. We have a memo from the league commissioner to the teams, and the memo reads, many of you are reporting to the press our actual attendance figures. You need to stop doing that. You can pad the numbers if you like. If you got 1,000 fans, say it's 3,000 fans. They're not counting. They're not going to know. Make up a number that's plausible, but make it higher. When the ABA started, I hear this about the WNBA all the time. If the WNBA dunked, they'd be popular.
Oh, yeah. I would not be sexist anymore, and I would watch them. That would cure sexism.
Exactly. Well, the first league that dunked was the ABA. When the ABA came along, the NBA didn't dunk. Okay? Oscar Robertson told this story. When Oscar Robertson played in the NBA, they said, we don't dunk. We are not the Harlem Globetrotters. This is not a circus show. We don't do things like that in the NBA. Dunking is prohibited. Nobody does that because you're not a clown. Okay? We play basketball. It's a game. You're supposed to respect the game. That was their attitude. Okay. The ABA comes along and they're like, we need to get fans. We're going to put on a show. And so they're dunking and they're doing everything. And did they have fans? No, there were no fans. Nobody came to see the ABA. Nobody gave a damn about that. They didn't care in the slightest. Connie Hawkins, who was their first big star, who dunked all the time, one of his famous quotes about the ABA and its early history is that we had a lot of fans show up as empty seats. That's how they showed up. He said you could count the house during the Star-Spangled Banner. While they're singing the national anthem, you could count how many fans are there. We got 200 fans. That's what we got. That's all. Nobody's showing up to watch us, and we're dunking like crazy. There's no dunking doesn't matter. That's not what drives fans to the games. Nobody cares about that. And that's the thing. Yeah. See, this is the thing. When it comes to men's sports, all the men think they know what drives demand. And it's like, no. Yeah. That's not what drives the man.
I recorded an episode of That Can't Be Right earlier, and if you're listening and have listened to it, it's about diversity in Hollywood and increasing representation on screen and how the studio executives say, we don't think that's going to work. The models say, you've never done it. What are you modeling based on? You're not an expert in this culture, you're not an expert here. This is not your domain. So let's just do it. Let's try it and see what happens because you're not connecting with the audience.
That was the whole thing about, if you look at Marvel movies, they're all white males. Every superhero is a white male. And then they do Black Panther, and then along came Wonder Woman and Captain Marvel, and there's these huge audiences. They're like, we didn't know that. What do you mean you didn't know that? You didn't know that. Well, you don't know anything. All you know is what you did in the past. You don't know, and there's this huge market out there that you're not reaching because you're a white male, and all you're doing is you're putting on things that you like. This is something that people don't understand. When executives talk about I modeled something, modeling is I looked in the mirror and went, well, I know what I like.
I'd watch it.
Yeah, I'd watch it.
Yep.
This one of the stories from early television history is remember the show Gilligan's Island?
Yes.
Gilligan's Island got canceled, but it wasn't canceled because it was unpopular. When it got canceled, it was a top 10 show. It was one of the highest rated shows on television when it got canceled. It got canceled because the wife of the newly executive, the guy who took over the network, his wife, watched Gilligan's Island after he took over, and she said, "That is so stupid. You've got to cancel that. That is unbelievably stupid. Get rid of it." I think that sort of highlights how these decisions get made. It's somebody says, "This is my preference, and I'm the decision maker." You're like, yeah, but the model says everybody loves this. I don't care what they love. It's stupid. Off it goes.
Yeah, it's
And that's how they make decisions. And that's why they do this with the WNBA. They're like, well, we can't expand because we don't know if there's a market for that. All right. That's ridiculous. Of course there's a market for that.
Yeah.
And you should have 15 players on a roster, just like the NBA. I mean, we're cutting players who are very, very good players. We've seen them play in Europe, and you're cutting them because you don't have any spots.
So let's jump into that. So for people who are listening and have not developed an emotional attachment to the WNBA, there are 12 WNBA teams currently. There's been some expansion. Some teams have closed. Some teams have moved. There are 12 spots per team as compared to the WNBA, which allows teams to carry 15, 16 people? 15. So that means there are 144 positions. WNBA draft was last month, 36 spots. How many players do you think will end up on a roster?
First round picks, pretty damn good chance of sticking. Second round picks, about a 50-50 shot. Third round pick, I don't know why we have third round picks.
Okay, so that was going to be my next question.
Yeah, third round picks, you're not. I'm sorry, they're not gonna keep a third round pick.
So what do you think the solution is if they can't expand in the short term? Should they nix that third round or what?
I don't know why they have a third round. It seems like they just do it for television because it's the odds of you making it are silly, and they're not going to make it. There's just no roster spots, and it's not those players are bad. It's just there's just not enough spots. There's just nowhere to put them, and
right.
And so the WNBA should be expanding. It should be expanding rapidly because, for one thing, it doesn't cost that much to expand these leagues. Okay, National Pro Fast Pitch, we mentioned this, cost $1 million a year to operate. $1 million a year. So when you look at the WNBA, they claim they're losing money and they're making $6-7 million per team, and they claim they're losing money. And you're like, how does a National Pro Fast Pitch team, which does the same travel that you guys do, survive on $1 million, and you can't make money on $8 million? It's not because you're paying the players, because you're not. It's not because you're paying the coaches, because you're not. What happened with the Atlanta Dream coach? Middle of training camp, she goes to Baylor. Middle of training camp. She started training camp, and she says, I'm the coach of the Dream. And a week later, she's like, no, I'm not. You're like, what do you mean you're not? We just started. Yeah, well, Baylor is offering me a ton of money, and I'm out of here. And so, goodbye. And why is that?
For those of you who don't know, Kim Mulkey was a coach at Baylor University for 21 years. When she left Baylor, she was making $2.2 million a year.
Yeah.
Made the jump to Louisiana State University. That's where she's from, Louisiana. They bumped her up to 2.7 a year. So Nikki Colleen walks into the negotiations knowing what they could pay, knowing that her WNBA salary was probably comparable to director of video operations at Baylor, and said, let's do this. Let's get this party started.
Exactly. And the thing about it is that if you can recruit, college job is remarkably secure. Mm-hmm. And if you are at a professional rank, there's no security at all. No. You are basically all 12 WNBA teams are all-star teams.
Yeah.
And it's this is terrifically competitive. So it's so obviously if they're going to pay me more money and I'm going to have more job security, why don't I just go do that?
Absolutely.
But the thing is that, so then the question, well, then how does the WNBA lose money?
Yes.
And the answer is, well, okay, they probably just waste it on things that a business normally wouldn't waste it on. So I had one One person told me in the WNBA that there was a team, they were picking out their league offices. They put their league office in the most expensive rent district in the city they're in because those are the nicest buildings. You're like, why would you do that? Well, I like a nice office. Well, National Pro Fast Pitch wouldn't do that because they don't, to give you an idea of the scale of operation, National Women's Soccer League, in order for them to have the championship cup last summer, the commissioner had to secure a loan from the federal government, and she was on the phone for 6 hours herself. Now, can you imagine Roger Goodell doing that with the NFL? Okay, it's okay. Goodell, in order for the NFL to have a season, you yourself, not somebody else, you are going to be on the phone for 6 hours
trying to get a PPP loan.
Yes, it's like, no, he's not going to do any of that. And so, and that's the scale of operation they're at. And the WNBA is, so that's why when WNBA says we're losing money, you're like, okay, you've studied business, so when it comes to the word profit, all right, I think people think who are not in business that profit is an absolute, that anyone who looked at a business's books would come to the same conclusion about profit. Mm-hmm. And the answer, if you talk to an accountant, is like, well, if that were the case, we wouldn't have accountants. We would just do this with a computer because obviously you can look at revenues and costs and come to different conclusions. And it depends on what the objective of your organization is. What are you trying to accomplish? Sometimes you want to show that you're losing money because it's better for your taxes. Sometimes you want to show that you're making money because it helps you secure investors. What are you trying to accomplish? So I do, and I have a fellow accounting colleague, as accounting professor. He does audits. He says the way we write audits is we write the business asserts the following, and then my job as an auditor is say, is that legal that you get to say that? I'm not saying it's right. Saying is it legal? Are you legally allowed to make that argument? Can you say that? I'm not saying it's the best thing you could say. It's not saying it's the only thing you could say. I'm just saying you could say that. And so when the NBA says we didn't make a profit on the WNBA, you're like, okay, can I see how you arrived at that conclusion? What are your costs that you're claiming? What are the revenues that you're claiming? And how are you adding these things up to come to that particular conclusion? And I'm highly skeptical of how you did that because I can imagine that I could go through and say, no, you didn't lose money.
Right.
If I do the revenues and costs this way, it's a different story.
Right. Because James Dolan was paying rent to himself?
Yes.
Where does that go? I did not do well in accounting, so I don't know where that goes on any of the accounting statements that I can't even name right now. But
if you're making deals with yourself, I mean, this was a big thing in baseball for long history. Is so you're accustomed to seeing TNT. Well, actually, they don't do this anymore. But they used to be. The Atlanta Braves were always on TBS and TNT.
Right. Turner.
Yeah. Ted Turner. This is back before cable television was a thing. So it used to be that there were just 3 channels. And then cable television came along, and Ted Turner buys this channel, TBS, Turner Broadcasting. And he's like, I need programming. I don't have any programming. I can show so many reruns, but I got no programming. So he goes and buys the Atlanta Braves. So he has programming to put on his station. And that allows him to, so now he can build up cable sales because people now are buying cable television to get Turner TBS so they can see the Braves. So the question is, clearly the Braves are driving TBS sales. What does he charge the Braves? Well, I own the Braves, and I own TBS. So the deal is, it's whatever the hell I want it to be. So he can go and say, the Braves don't make any money. What do you mean they don't make any money? They because of the Braves, you had TBS, and because of TBS, you got TNT, and because of TBS, TNT, you got CNN. You built this multi-billion-dollar media empire off of the Braves. Because you don't have the Braves, you don't have any of that. What do you mean the Braves? What does he charge the Braves? Well, whatever I feel like charging them. So
this brings up a question, and I'm not sure I'm going to ask the question correctly or we'll be able to discuss it in its entirety here. But Ted Turner buys the Atlanta Braves and puts them on cable TV. I don't know what the circumstances were for the Atlanta Braves, but a lot of teams lot of organizations get subsidies or tax breaks to build stadiums in different cities at the expense of the local taxpayers. Is it fair for, ultimately, why aren't sports like on public broadcasting? Has that ever happened in the past?
Okay, so this is a big issue, and this is a men's sports issue, not a women's sports issue. Men's sports get public subsidies. They get billions of dollars in public subsidies. Economists spend a lot of time writing articles about these subsidies, and the answer that comes back from these over and over and over again is no, they do not generate a return. This is nonsense. I have a friend, one of my co-authors, lives in Atlanta. They moved the Major League Baseball All-Star team game out of Atlanta because of the legislation they passed. And they said it's going to cost our economy $100 million, or as Chuck Grassley, the senator from Iowa, said, 100 million jobs, which is pretty cool for Atlanta because there's not 100 million people. So everybody in Atlanta is going to lose their job for the next 2 centuries because we moved the Major League Baseball.
Consequences.
Yes.
Consequences.
And this guy, this co-author of mine, he tweets about this, it seems like every day, and he just goes ballistic on this. He goes, the $100 million figure was made up. It was a made up figure. Somebody just threw it out there. There's no data behind this. They just made it up. And it's total nonsense. It does not generate anything. These taxpayer subsidies for sports don't generate economic growth. They don't generate jobs. They don't do anything. That's not an engine of growth. We know that. Why do politicians care? Why do they give money? Because, and this is the way I told one reporter, let's imagine that you're on the city council, you're the city executive or whatever that arranged the Major League Baseball game to come to Atlanta. I'm pretty sure Major League Baseball gave you and your family free tickets. So now I get to go to the game. And I'm going to take my kids, and this is going to be great because we're going to meet and they're going to get to meet all the players because they're the person who made all this possible. And that's why they do it. They're like, is that going to generate, how much taxpayer money are you going to spend to make this game happen? I don't care. I get free tickets, and that's what we're going to do. But it's only for men's sports. If you said to these same politicians, how much would you pay to bring the WNBA All-Star game to your city? How much would you pay to bring a WNBA team to your city or build a new arena for your WNBA team or National Pro Fast Pitch or whatever? I don't care. What if we gave you free tickets? I don't want to go. I don't care. It's just another business. I'm not going to give them anything. And so we don't give subsidies to women. We give so the men sit there and they say, our leagues are worth billions and billions and billions of dollars. You're like, yeah, you started 70 years early, 100 years earlier because you prohibited women from playing sports. And then men gave you billions and billions of dollars in subsidies to make your thing. And then we get to the sports media. Sports media gives 95% of their coverage just to you, so they build you up with free coverage. You have all these things that you didn't earn. You didn't earn any of this. This is not because you're inherently more interesting. It is simply because of a history of sexism. That's why you are where you are. You didn't earn a damn thing. And that's something men just can't seem to come to grips with. But that's what the data says. That's what the story is.
I don't think anybody was ready. I think that was a perfect 10 to 20 second, 30 second explanation of the whole episode that men sports aren't better. You're not more interesting. You're not, more competitive or anything like that. It's just that you got these subsidies, or your owner also owned a TV station and created a relationship that worked for everybody, instead of complaining, I got a team, rent's high. I'm still clearly tied up on what James Dolan said, but he is not good at his job.
No, he's not. And he inherited all his wealth too. So it's like he's never had a job. He never done anything. He had it all handed to him. So yeah, that's James Dolan. James Dolan's whole story is people just gave me things.
Okay. Yes. I'd love for that to be my story, but I'd make it a better story, hopefully, and not burn everything to the ground. As a matter of fact, I told my mom that the New York Knicks had the chance to clinch a playoff spot. And I said, the Knicks have a chance to clinch a playoff spot this year. And she said, from New York? I was like, yes. Do you know any other Knicks? But they just haven't been competitive in almost a decade.
And the bizarre thing about how they became competitive this year, and this is something that the New York media doesn't seem to understand, is the New York Knicks were bad really, really, really bad for like the last 5 or 6 years. And they accumulated all of these lottery picks. And when you go through the data, none of the lottery picks are doing anything for them. They built their team based on a bunch of rejects. Julius Randle's a reject. Somebody else didn't want him. That's why he's there. So their whole team is built on players that everybody else passed over. They could have had these players 5 years ago, but they didn't know who they were. So what they were doing is they acquired lottery picks, and then they guessed on who the rest of the roster should be. And in this case, they got lucky. They guessed right. And so it's fascinating that Knicks suddenly have a competitive team, but it's entirely by accident. It was not intentional. They didn't know what they were doing. They didn't know who these
and someone's
going
to sign a contract extension based on that.
Based on luck. And they're going to say, I built the Knicks. And if I were doing the job interview, it's like, I want you to tell me in detail how you think you did that. How did you do that? How did you decide this player because it's not the case that all of your players are good. So tell me which were the good ones that you got and which were the bad ones you got, and tell me how you did that. Because I'm guessing that you guessed and you don't even know which ones were the good ones. You don't know which ones you got lucky on and which ones you didn't. I bet you couldn't tell me.
Which one was a lottery pick and which one wasn't?
Because I'll give you a hint. It wasn't any of your lottery picks, so you whiffed on all of them. So those were all bad decisions. So what were the good decisions that you made?
None.
And so it's like, you got lucky, you guessed. And it's like, yeah, see, and they're going to tell a story, look what I did. You didn't do anything. You got lucky. And this is another thing that is irritating about men's sports. All of these jobs in men's, or at least predominantly these jobs in men's sports, go to white males. They don't hire women. They don't hire African Americans. They just hire white males. And these white males get jobs because they're friends with other white males. And because this is not a normal business, somebody has to win every year. Every year a white male wins and says, see how clever I am? And you're like, yeah, somebody has to win. That doesn't make you clever. No matter if you're all making, I wrote this in my first book. I said, if every team played their mascot, a team would win playing their mascot. And then we would have a debate about which is the best mascot. But that would, of course, would be insane. You don't want a mascot playing. But we all agreed you got to play the mascot.
Yeah.
But I have a study here that says playing the mascot doesn't help any. So you don't need to play a mascot. But that's how they do it. They all do these decisions. And you're like, but your underlying model is wrong. That's not how that works. And the reason why you have your job is because you're a white male who got hired by another white male and you're all friends. Why aren't you hiring, why are 80% of the head coaching jobs in the NBA white males?
When the league is
80% African American. Why are you doing that? Why aren't you hiring women? There are lots of women college coaches. Cheryl Reeve has told me she's never been interviewed, never even got an interview with an NBA team. She's won 4 WNBA titles. They won't even call her.
And she is someone who does a really good job as GM.
Yes.
If you're listening and you're not a fan of the WNBA yet, her top player, MVP, Naismith Player of the Year, has been out for 2, going on 3 seasons? Or is it one? Yeah. Didn't miss a beat. Miss a beat.
They keep winning because she knows how to pick players. And that's the thing. And she's in the same building with the Clippers were the worst team. The new worst team is the Minnesota Timberwolves. So Steve Ballmer has managed to turn the Clippers into not the worst team. The worst team in North American sports history is the Minnesota Timberwolves. They are the lowest winning percentage of any team, and they're in the same building with the Lynx. And you would think that somebody with the Timberwolves would walk down the hall and just casually say to Coach Reeve, just out of curiosity, if let's say you were running would you give us any hints? Anything that you, little tips maybe? What would you do just casually? Maybe you would do it this. They don't do that. They don't ask her. And you're like, but shouldn't you ask her? She's in the building with you and she's winning and you're losers. So maybe you should ask.
Just knock on her door.
Yeah, just
open door policy.
Just a casual little. just a hypothetical. Let's say you were running, let's say just sort of an NBA, just a hypothetical NBA team that lost all the time.
Yeah.
What would you do today?
If the ball wasn't going into the hoop as often as you would like, how would you go about changing that?
How would you change that? How would you change that? Yeah, it's that, it's funny. Yeah. The Timberwolves have had the number one lottery pick has been on their roster. They've had 4 or 5 of them now. None of them are only Towns is any good. The rest of them are horrible.
I feel like you'd get a lot of pushback on Towns. I won't, because I don't watch the Timberwolves. I have my own terrible team to worry about.
Towns is okay. He's good. He's not great. He's good. But Anthony Edwards is he's terrible. And he was terrible at Georgia. It's like, how could you draft this guy number 1 overall? He was not even good in college. You had all of the college players to choose from, and you chose somebody who wasn't even a good college player. How do you do that? How are you that unbelievably wrong? Are you throwing darts at a wall? I mean, how are you? Were you just picking names out of a hat? I mean, what are you doing here? And they had Andrew Wiggins. Wiggins was the same guy. And that's the thing about Edwards is they had Wiggins, and then they wouldn't got the same guy. We got rid of Wiggins. Let's go get another guy just like that. Well, you just had a guy like that.
Yep.
The guy who just shoots and does nothing else. It's like, yeah, we're going to get another one of those. That didn't work last time. Why are you doing it again? Yeah.
All right. Let's pivot back for the last part of our conversation. What's the way forward? What's the way forward to create equity in women's sports? We've talked about men not being sexist. If we can fix that, I think that's the way. Getting men to invest, getting women to invest, getting other people to invest. Like, what is the way forward?
I think a lot of it's talking. You got to speak up. You got to say things. You got to call people out. So there's that. I think social media gives us an opportunity because I think historically, if you said something, 30, 40 years ago, not much pushback. There's only newspapers around, maybe an occasional television story. But now it's social media exists. So, you saw that with the NCAA with the weight room thing. If that happens 30 years ago, nobody cares. But that happens. There's this huge, storm on social media, and suddenly they change. So I think you have to speak up and say things. That's step one. So you got to do your best to tell stories. You got to be patient. That's the other thing. You can't look at every year of attendance in these sports and every television rating and think that that's a statement about the value of the future. It's right now, it looks like ratings are going up. They're not going to go up, in a straight line. It's not going to be every single season it goes up. There's going to be a trend over time that it'll go up. And you have to be patient and understand that sometimes it'll go down and you got to be patient. And you got to understand leagues that are 5 years old, 10 years old, 25 years old do not look the same as a league that's 70 years old. And so you got to understand that, the WNBA, I think, will be successful, but it may take another 25 years before you see that success at the same scale you see the NBA at. And you have to be patient and say it just takes time because you have to build up the stories. If the Lakers and Celtics were to meet in the finals this year, which is probably not going to happen, but if they did, that would mean a lot to a lot of fans because of the history between the Lakers and the Celtics. And so even though none of the players in the close are those Lakers and Celtics, they're not Bill Russell, they're not Will Chamberlain, they're not Kareem, they're not Larry Bird, they're not Magic, they're not those players. The history gives meaning to what you're seeing. And until your league is 50, 60 years old, you don't have the history to tell those stories. If you watch a Major League Baseball game, you watch the Astros play, how much time will the announcer spend talking about something in history? I was watching a Mets-Red Sox game, and they spent a couple of innings discussing the 1986 World Series.
Oh, yeah.
That only means something because there was a history. I can talk about that. If I watch a WNBA game, what can I talk about? What history can I talk about? I can't make those. It hasn't happened yet. I can't do that. I can't sit there and say, Brianna Stewart reminds me of that player. Well, that player isn't there, and she's at the beginning.
Right.
So I don't have that yet. And so I
was just saying, going back to your point about coverage, right? Like, we don't have the media coverage to even look back at to make those comparisons.
Exactly.
The documentation and the coverage of the early years of WNBA, not great.
And that's, LeBron matters because there was Michael Jordan, and Michael Jordan matters because there was Dr. J, and Dr. J matters because there was Elgin Baylor, and that's all that perspective gives people some way of connecting to the player. Okay? But the WNBA hasn't been around long enough for me to say, when you're getting up to the draft, this player is going to be great because they're like this player that you used to love. Oh, okay. Now I know what my reference point is. I can't do that just yet. I don't have the history yet. So I'm hoping to have the history, but I don't have it yet. So until you have it, you're not going to get the same kind of excitement. And so I think it's speaking up. You got to talk. You got to be patient. And I think, and I think you got to call out people who are making dumbass investments in men's sports when they could be making investments in women's sports. It's like, what are you doing? Why are you doing that?
Yep.
And so I think that's the thing. I have a lot of confidence. This is all, in 25, 30 years, this is all going to get better.
Nice.
I think. I don't know.
I'm with you.
I don't know. I hope it does. I hope we're not 40 years from now having exactly the same conversations. But I look forward to a day where the articles I write are just a lot of "I told you so's."
I want that for you. As someone who loves being right, I want that for you.
I like that. Those be my stories. I want to be able to say, when I'm in my 80s, I told you so. That'll be my book I'll write when I'm 85. I told you so. I told you so. I told you it'll work out. So I think that's the thing. You want to do that. So
all right, last question. Actually, last set of questions, kind of rapid fire-ish. Who do you got for the WNBA championship?
That's a tough one. Aces, Lynx are good. I think those two I put up top.
Rookie of the year.
Oh, I don't know. That's a tough one. That's a tough one. I mean, these things are based on scoring. I mean, the hard part is you have to have a player who gets. I mean, it was Crystal Dangerfield last year. That was accidental. I mean, they lost their point guard, and she got to play, and she likes to shoot, and so she got to be Rookie of the Year. She was not the best rookie, but she got to be Rookie of the Year. I mean, I see a player who does that, who comes in and gets. This is a hard thing for these college players to adjust to. Is that you were the star in college, and you're on an all-star team. You're not the star. They're not going to let you come in. You have McDonald with the dream. It's like, I'm sorry, we're not going to let you take 25 shots a game. We're not going to do that. That's not going to happen.
Going to adjust a little.
You're going to have to adjust a lot. I mean, you're going to be like, okay, we're going to let you take 5 shots. And if the first 3 don't get in, it's going to be 3 shots.
Yeah.
So that's going to be. And you're like, wow. So that's a really tough one. Yeah, I don't know who's going to be Rookie of the Year.
Here's hopefully a little easier. Who are you most excited to see back on the court that wasn't playing in the bubble last summer?
Oh. Elena Deladon wasn't there last year, was she?
She was not.
Yeah, Elena Deladon would be. Yeah, she's. I think that's going to be good to have her back. Sylvia Fowles was there. She just was hurt most of the time.
Hurt a lot, yeah.
So it'd be nice if she could play a full season. She's older now. It'd be nice if she could play the whole season. That'd be nice.
Definitely. Well, David, this was incredibly enlightening. Confirmed some of my theories that weren't well formulated at all, but you put them in sentences that people can hear and that will make sense. So last thing, where can we find you on the internet? What books have you written? What do you have coming up?
Okay, so I'm on Twitter at Wages of Wins. And Wages of Wins was my first book. No, I don't know what the title means. It was just a collection of words. There's a story behind the title, and I've never quite understood what the hell it meant. I did make it up, but I was like, I remember saying that to a publisher. Well, what about Wages of Wins? That sounds great. What the hell does that mean?
The cover looks great. Book is great.
Yeah, so Wages and Wins. That was followed by Stumbling on Wins. My next book will not have wins in the title. So I've written a textbook on sports economics. I just wrote a book on the economics of the Super Bowl with 2 co-authors. So Ivan Kelly and Victor Matheson. Neff Walker and I are doing a book though on women in sports that we're excited about, and so we hope to have that come out. I don't know. We'll see. Later in the year, maybe next year. We're excited about that. So that's a big one that we're doing.
Awesome. Well, David, thank you so much for joining me. You guys don't know this, but we had to reschedule because I'm not going to tell you my business actually, but we had to reschedule, and we almost had to reschedule today too. But David, thank you so much. This was great. Thanks again to David for joining me on That Can't Be Right. Links to his books, Twitter, and website are in the episode description. Feel free to cite this episode and anything from David when the guy who would have played D1 but he twisted his ankle when the recruiter came to watch complains about women's sports. Watch the WNBA. Watch National Women's Soccer League. Watch National Pro Fast Pitch. Watch National Women's Hockey League. If you're vax, wax, and ready to go, head to a game in your city. Athletes, subscribe to That Can't Be Right wherever you get your podcasts and add it to your workout playlist. If this voice doesn't motivate you to run faster, I don't know what to do. Any questions, comments, or concerns? Send me an email, thatcan'tberightpodcast@gmail.com. Until next time, friends,